What was Vietnam like when you first got there?
Uh, well, to somebody who doesn't have much luck, yeah, I was scared. You know what is the word starts with an S and ends with an LESS. Uh, because you didn't know what to expect. Almost everybody there, the flight, I flew from Chicago to San Francisco, got on a big plane that was filled with all of us scared guys because we were and women. There were some female soldiers going too, but we were all destined for Vietnam, and so it was kind of a scary time because that flight we went from there to uh, briefly in Guam to refuel. Then we flew to Okinawa, Japan. We're there for a brief time again to refuel, and then we flew to Ben Hoa, South Vietnam. And we're all talking amongst each other, sharing stories about what we were going to expect, and we had no concept of what to expect, what we were going to do. Excuse me. When I arrived, like most of us, we went to a replacement battalion. It was just a large base where everybody went to be processed to determine where you were going to go from the replacement battalion to what unit in Vietnam. Well, I was sitting in that replacement battalion, I think, for 2 to 3 days when they finally called me into the office and they say, Lieutenant Sax, we're sending you to a place called Xi'an. Uh, Xi'an, okay, just another Vietnamese name or a base, whatever. But can you tell me a little bit more about what's in Xi'an? Well, that's the headquarters for the 1st Infantry Division. Oh, so I'm going to the infantry. When I was in college in advanced ROTC, I was working my butt off to try and do anything to avoid the infantry. Well, they send me to Xi'an. My first night in Xi'an, I was put in a temporary quarters. It's called a hooch. Uh, Basically a cot with a chest of drawers and everything to sit to see what unit beyond that within the 1st Infantry Division I was going to. Keep in mind that I'm an ammunition officer, so I'm writing notes back to family at home saying I'm with the 1st Infantry Division here in Vietnam, and I got to be honest with you, it's not looking real good. Uh, The first night I was there, a rocket hit about, I'd say 300 feet, so 100 yards away from my hooch, and it literally just threw me out of bed onto the floor. Well, here I am, basically about my 4th or 5th night in country, and already I'm on the ground as a result of a rocket hitting in the area. And I'm just thinking to myself, my life is passing in front of me because I realize if I go out into the country with whatever unit, my numbers are probably a bit limited. Well, I sat there in that hooch for 3 days, I believe it was. And 3 days, it's almost like being in a confinement, if you will, because you don't know what your future is. You don't know where you're going, what you're doing. I get called back into the commander's office, and he says, "Well, Lieutenant Sax, I got bad news. Nobody ever likes to hear that phrase. The unit we were going to send you to already has 3 ammunition officers, and we don't need another one. We're sending you back to the replacement battalion." Oh, really? Okay, sir. When do I leave? He said, grab your gear. You're leaving in an hour. Well, I got sent back to the 94th Replacement Battalion back in Long Binh or in Ben Hoa, and I'm thinking, could I finally have gotten a little bit of good luck in my life because I don't have to be an ammo officer with the infantry division. So again, I'm back in the replacement battalion for just a short while, and I get orders to go to the 3rd Ordnance Battalion. Well, again, we now know what ordnance is, and that's all about bombs and bullets. But the 3rd Ordnance Battalion was the largest ammunition depot in Vietnam. We were in the area of Bien Hoa, not far from Saigon, which at the time everybody knew Saigon as like the capital of South Vietnam. Well, again, I didn't know what to expect. I just knew that I wasn't going to be with an infantry division. I was going to be with an ordnance battalion. I was sent, given my orders there. I met with the commander of the battalion, and again, you have to understand that a lot of us that were sent there, you just don't know. You're like a chess piece on a board, and you don't know where you're being moved next. So you're concerned, you're worried, you're hoping for the best, planning for the worst. So anyway, I go into this the commanding officer, and he asks me about my background. Well, again, I tell him what I went to college, I studied broadcasting, and I'm a very much a people person. My background with my parents in business and all that. I was hoping to get into the Armed Forces Vietnam Network, but I'm an ammo officer, and sir, whatever assignment I get, I will give it my best. This colonel looks at me, and I told you that I wasn't a particularly lucky person, but that day, all the stars were lined up in my favor. And the colonel says to me, son, you know what? I'm very, very strong on troop morale. And my battalion is filled with guys who are going out into the ammo depot and humping ammo all day, because you have to understand, our main mission there was to move ammunition around this vast depot on a regular basis every day, because the enemy was surveilling the area, dropping mortar shells and rockets to try and light us up like the 4th of July. So they were figuring where within the depot was the high explosive munitions. So the work of those that were in the battalion was basically moving ammunition, not only supplying the troop trucks that were coming in for resupply to go out into the field, but also to just keep that ammunition coming in and moving around, so nobody knew where it was. And this was a 24-hour operation. Well, this colonel said to me, you know, these guys come off of duty and they're tired. We have got a quote unquote officer and enlisted bar, if you will, where the guys can go in for a cold brew if they want. We've got a PX that is so substandard that we just can't get supplies to these troops to make them happy. You know, just things like cigarettes and beer when it was available, and canned goods, packages of snacks, anything for them to buy to have. So, Lieutenant Sax, do you think that you could maybe build a PX for the benefit of our troops? Do you think maybe you could help improve on the officers club and the NCO club, and help with troop morale? Give these guys a place to go when they're not working all day, and just give them a little bit of a pleasure. Yes, sir, I can do that. Now, other than picking up a hammer and nail to put up a painting or something in on my wall in college, I didn't really know an awful lot about construction. Fortunately, I had a sergeant that was assigned to me who had spent some time in construction. And I said to him, do you think we could do this? He said, absolutely. He said, stop and think about what some of the alternatives might be. So we accepted the project. We took out paper and pencil and we sketched out a building that we wanted to build to put in a PX. Got it approved by the colonel. He said it was about four or five times the size of the current one, which was literally falling apart. And he said, whatever you need, I'll get it for you. Huh. Thank you very much. The stars are shining on me. So myself, my sergeant, two other enlisted, we got a hold of some papasans, which are the local Vietnamese men. Most of them were probably in their 60s and 70s. And they were going to be our carpenters, and we were going to build this this retail facility for the benefit of the troops. Well, we did it. It took about 3 months. We had availability of the materials that we needed, and we put up a PX. And instead of incandescent light bulbs in the ceiling, we managed to get some fluorescent light fixtures, and we actually built a pretty good looking facility. Put in cases for some of the electronics that we were going to try and get for our troops, stocked the shelves with food. And when I say food, I'm talking about like things like canned hot dogs, pork and beans, and all packages of snacks, chips of any kind. Beer came in by the pallet, and keep in mind, we didn't have refrigerators and all in Vietnam. So you learned how to drink warm beer, or you found a place where actually what a lot of the guys would do is they dig a hole in the ground, because the ground temperature was actually a little cooler than above ground. So you take your beer cans and put them in the ground so they keep a little bit cool. And my mind is running now because I'm thinking of all kinds of other stories. But the idea really was to just make life better for the troops. Okay, now we built the PX. The colonel is absolutely thrilled, and he says, well, listen, if you could build a PX, the guy's got no place to go to get a haircut or whatever. You got any other ideas? Went back to my sergeants and everything. We said, why don't we build another building where we could put a small barber shop and even a laundry? Because keep in mind, if we needed some of our laundry done, sometimes the mamasans that would come by day to clean our hooches and everything would take laundry back home with them, and they would spend the evening doing the laundry for, at that time, probably would do all your laundry for $1 US, which I don't remember exactly how many piastres that was in the Vietnamese money at the time. But anything you needed, you could probably get from the Vietnamese that were coming in by bus every day to the post to take care of that. So we built in the next month and a half, I think we built a laundry and a barbershop facility. And I will tell you that on the property where the 3rd Ordnance Battalion was, because keep in mind, before we were there, the French were there for many, many years before the Americans went in to help the South Vietnamese. And this had become a former French plantation. On the property that I was now the officer in charge of the PX, we had improved the NCO and officers club, if you will. It was a combined facility. We had the only in-ground swimming pool that I knew of, at least in South Vietnam. It was in terrible shape. Fortunately, there was a sergeant that was in the unit that had a background in the pool business. Well, we enlisted him to take a look at this hole in the ground that was filled with basically ugly rainwater and all kinds of bugs and everything. did we think that we could clean this out and turn it into a functioning swimming pool? And he was working out on the bunker line at night. I mentioned it to the colonel. The colonel said, "You ain't going out on the bunker line anymore because I'm going to put you and Lieutenant Sax and whoever else he needs to get that swimming pool working for the benefit of our troops." Another few months and all, but we drained that swamp, if you will, cleaned it out, secured paint to repaint it, got a hold of the chlorine and other chemicals needed. We didn't have a filtration system for the pool, so it had to be done, on a daily basis. We turned it into a functioning swimming pool for the benefit of the troops. And then naturally we had to put them all on schedules, who could go. But now here is Lieutenant Sax sitting back, and he's the officer in charge of a swimming pool and a PX and a laundry and barbershop facility. And the colonel just thinks I'm the greatest gift to ever come his way because his troops are feeling the way he wanted them to feel. And I felt pretty good about that because I was creating troop morale, and I felt awfully good about it. Well, in addition to that, again, because I had a background in broadcasting, and there were a lot of guys there that from different walks of life. I found another sergeant in my unit who was in electrical engineering. And in those days, we had cassettes. If people know what cassettes are, now this, we didn't have phonograph records to play vinyl discs and everything, and cassettes were a lot easier to get a hold of. And if you had time and the money to go to the PX and buy electronics, almost every soldier wanted a boombox. And these were the kind that were the size of a small suitcase that you could carry on your shoulder, and you'd put your cassettes in there and you would play your music. Well, this sergeant said, we could probably start a radio station here in the battalion. All we need to do is run some wire through the roof of the PX and wire up the trees above the PX and all for an antenna, and get a microphone and all, and we could probably set up a small radio station. I said, great, that's up my alley. I would love to. So we set up a pirate radio station, and if this is starting to sound a little familiar, there was a movie many, many years ago called Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, who played the part of Adrian Cronauer, who started a pirate radio station over in Vietnam. He got all the accolades, and actually my pirate radio station was set up. He was in a different part of the country, but probably about the same time, if not a little bit before. I did what he did, but he got all the notoriety and everything, and I just set up my pirate radio station for the benefit of the troops. We only broadcasted about a one square mile area, but what we would do is we would get information from some of the troops that, Sergeant Mahoney's wife just gave birth to their first baby, and we would broadcast that over the air, and we would play the music of the day, any kind of news that we could get from the Armed Forces Vietnam Network. We would read that news. I had about 6 guys. We would take turns at the microphone, and we would try and broadcast for the benefit of the troops, just to let them know what was going on back home and give them the opportunity to say hello to their loved ones back in the United States, even though we were broadcasting only within about a 1 mile area. The guys felt good about about some of that news that was coming to them from America, and then we could distribute it, and did that for several months. Now I'm about 9 months into my tour of Vietnam, and I'm feeling real good because I honestly felt I was making a difference. My colonel felt I was making a difference. There was a change of command. Now, I'm 9 months into my tour. Keep in mind that once you get 9 months into a tour, that's about 90 days until you're supposed to go back stateside. And that's when a lot of troops start using the phrase getting short, meaning that time is ticking down 90 days, 89, 80. Everybody had a calendar on the wall in their hooch, and you would just X out every day until you got to the day that you were going back home. Because the tour of duty was basically a year. Well, we had a change of command, and the new colonel comes in, and one by one, he's meeting with all of his officers to find out what they're doing and determine what's right, what's wrong, well. I am feeling so high because when I get called into this new colonel's office, I'm thinking, I'm the guy that's in charge of troop morale, and I'm making all of our troops feel pretty good. Colonel really looks at me and he says, I don't give a damn about troop morale. These guys are over here to do a job, and we're going to do the job. And as of this right now, today, Lieutenant Sax, you are relieved of your duty at the PX and the laundry facility and the gift shop and the barber shop and all this other crap that you're doing. You're not doing it anymore. We have an opening for an officer in charge of the bunker line, the perimeter of the ammo depot, and I'm assigning you to that. No more of what you're doing. You're going to be the OIC of the bunker line. All of a sudden, that good news story of mine got really bad news. I got 90 days left in country, and I'm now being assigned to go out from 6 p.m. sunset until sunrise in total darkness out to the ammo depot. There were 18 foxholes out there that were filled with three personnel each every night, and their sole duty for 12 hours was to just look out into the vast nowhere through night scopes and everything to try and see if there's anything moving out there. It's scary stuff, because sometimes you saw something moving that wasn't moving, and somebody would lock and load and fire rounds out there. And keep in mind, in war situations, when you fire a weapon, you just telegraphed what your position is. So if there in fact is an enemy out there, he now knows where that flash of fire came from, and he's going to try and send a rocket in there. Well, my job was to go one by one to each of these 18 locations every night, 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, I should say, to check on these troops. Number one, to make sure that they were awake and they were doing their job, and they were, one was sleeping while 2 were awake, and they would take turns, taking a little bit of a rest and everything, while the next one would get on the scopes and to look to see what was going on, because the enemy was out there. We knew the enemy was out there. It was a very, very large area, covered by a lot of foliage, of which the planes would come in from time to time, and most people watching this know what Agent Orange is. It was a defoliant that was dropped to try and get rid of all of the foliage. And no doubt it was used in our area to try and prevent the enemy from hiding behind bushes and trees and foliage. because his only goal in life was to drop a mortar shell or a rocket into that ammo depot in order to start the 4th of July and just light us up. And our responsibility was to make sure that that depot was secure and to keep an eye out for, because the enemy was going to be there at night, not during the day. Most of the time, they were going to be there at night, trying to maneuver a position in order to either overrun one of these foxholes or to try and send some shells into the ammo depot. So my responsibility for 3 months, the longest, I could tell you it was the longest 90 days of my life, was to go from foxhole to foxhole to make sure the troops were awake, alert. We would do that for 12 hours a night. The only light that we had was from the moon. And we all know that the moon goes from new moon to quarter, half, 3/4, and a full moon. And in a full moon, we had to move very slowly so as not to telegraph our movement and our location. It's hard to try and describe to somebody, unless you've been there, what it's like to try and operate and live in total darkness. Not even we had the guys, if they wanted to smoke, would have to get down on their butts inside the foxhole in order to light a cigarette, because even the light from a Zippo lighter was enough to tell an enemy that was out there that there was something over there. So the last 3 months were tough. I would get back to my hooch about 6:30 in the morning. You were dead tired, just wanted to get a little bit of sleep and walk over to that calendar and cross off another day. I'm giving you, details of what it was like for 1 year out of my life. And while I was in Vietnam, this was in 1969 and 1970, two extremely important events went on back at home. Number one, I was sitting in Vietnam when Neil Armstrong stepped off of the landing on the moon. When the first man stepped on the moon, I was in Vietnam. And not too long after that was Woodstock, which was, said to be the greatest weekend of music and peace and love and all back in America, and that took place. And I just heard about it because I was in Vietnam when that happened back in the States. So a lot of us that were on our way back to the United States thought, we got a lot of catching up to do. When we get back, we want to meet with our buddies and go drinking and carousing and having a good time. And as I'm sure many of the other people that you have interviewed have said, when we got off of that plane in San Francisco to make our connections back home, in my case, catch a plane back to Chicago, couldn't wait to get back to see my family, to see my friends, to see my neighbors, to try and recapture my life again that I had left, a year earlier, and prior to that, my college days, my old college buddies. But it was like somebody picked up a heavyweight baseball bat and smacked me in the head and smacked my buddies in the head, because we came back to a different America. I had served my country. What the opinion was of the war in Vietnam really was immaterial at that point, because we at least took a pledge to put on a uniform and defend the concepts and the democracy of our country and that of those of South Vietnam who were trying to run their country in a democratic way also. So we came home, and my neighbors, and I told you earlier that my parents lived in the same house for some 65 years. So a lot of the people in my neighborhood were still there when I came home. Except when I came home, and they hadn't seen me in a while, because 4 years of college and then 2 years in the army and everything, and now I'm back in the neighborhood to spend some time with my parents before moving on. And I saw neighbors who wouldn't even open their doors for me. And I grew up with their kids playing in the sand lots, and playing baseball and football out in the park. And I had served in the army, and they looked at me like I was some kind of a monster. How could I go into the army? How could I go to Vietnam and all? They couldn't trust me anymore. They didn't want me around their children or their grandchildren and everything, because I was, quote unquote, a baby killer. It was again, now going from a tough time in my life, now I'm coming back to almost a completely different world. And that lasted a long, long, long time. The only solace that I had was that I joined the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and I would go to some meetings, and I'd meet with other veterans, and we would share our stories and all. But even when I got into business with my parents for a while, I was afraid to tell any of them that I had served in the military. That pride that I had in doing something honorable for my country, I didn't want to share with anybody, because I didn't want them to take it the wrong way.